For the first 10 seconds, I want you to imagine a silence so heavy it feels like the world itself has forgotten you exist. A silence so deep that an 8-year-old girl named Michelle thought her own voice had left her forever. And on a warm Sunday morning, as her father knelt beside her bed, she looked up at him with tired eyes and whispered a question he could barely hear, a question that would haunt him for years. "Daddy, why can't I hear you?" That moment broke him. And if you're a parent, you already know the kind of pain that sits behind a question like that. Now, before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Subscribe for more timeless stories that will touch your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends. Michelle lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where kids rode bicycles after school and neighbors waved from freshly trimmed lawns. But inside the Hart household, life was anything but peaceful. Her father, Daniel Hart, was the CEO of a multinational manufacturing company. His days were spent on conference calls, flights, board meetings, and negotiations. People called him a visionary, a builder, a powerhouse in the corporate world. But none of those titles meant anything when it came to the one problem he couldn't solve: his daughter's world growing quieter every year. Michelle's hearing had begun fading slowly around the age of 4. At first, it was small things, her asking people to repeat themselves, turning the TV volume up a little too high, pausing during conversations as if she were trying to fill in missing words in her mind. Her teachers thought she was distracted. Doctors said it was a phase. Specialists claimed it was mild and manageable. But by the time she turned 6, her world had dimmed into something. One evening, as Daniel sat beside her at the dining table trying to help with homework, she looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Did you say something?"
"I did," he said gently.
"You didn't hear me?" She shook her head. "Everything sounds far away." And that was the moment he knew something was deeply wrong. What followed was a 2-year journey, one filled with hospital visits, tests, second opinions, third opinions, and treatments that promised hope but delivered nothing. Every expert gave him the same answer: "We're not sure." Some even suggested irreversible nerve damage. Others proposed expensive experimental therapies. Daniel paid for all of it without hesitation. He would have moved mountains if someone had asked him to, but nothing changed. Michelle continued drifting into a quieter world, and with every passing day, Daniel felt the guilt of not protecting her, not finding answers sooner, not being able to fix the one thing that mattered more to him than all the companies he had ever built. 2 years into their struggle, life became a pattern of routines: specialists on Mondays, speech exercises on Wednesdays, new medications on Fridays, silence every day in between. Their home felt like a museum where sound had been boxed away and stored out of reach. But everything changed the day a new housekeeper arrived at the Hart home. Someone no one expected to notice anything at all. Her name was Harriet Ross, a quiet, soft-spoken woman in her early 40s who had worked for private families in the past. She was hired not as a nurse, not as a specialist, but simply as a caretaker to help Michelle after school, prepare meals, and keep her company on days when Daniel was buried in meetings. From the moment she entered the Hart home, she treated Michelle not like a patient, not like a fragile child, but like a little girl who still deserved laughter, attention, and moments of normalcy. And Michelle responded to her in ways she hadn't responded to anyone in months. One afternoon, as the two of them sat at the kitchen counter painting small ceramic birds, something Michelle had grown fond of, Harriet noticed something odd. Each time she spoke, Michelle turned her head not toward her voice, but toward her face. She wasn't reacting to sound. She was reacting to movement. Harriet leaned forward slightly and tried a simple test. "Michelle, can you hear me from here?" No response. She moved closer. "How about now?" Still nothing. She whispered directly beside her ear, "Sweetheart?" Michelle blinked but didn't react. Harriet placed her brush down. Michelle, does your ear feel strange? The little girl shrugged. It feels full sometimes. Full how? Harriet asked. Like something is stuck inside. That night, after Michelle had gone to bed, Harriet waited for Daniel to return from work. When he walked into the house looking exhausted and carrying his laptop bag, she approached him gently. Mr. Hart, may I speak with you? He loosened his tie. Is everything okay with Michelle? I'm not sure, she admitted, but she mentioned a feeling in her ear, something she's felt for a while. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We've done every test imaginable. If something were there, they would have found it. I understand, she said softly. But may I take a look tomorrow during the day? Just to be sure? He hesitated, then nodded. If you think it will help. The next afternoon, while Michelle was coloring in the living room, Harriet gently examined her ear using a small light she carried as part of a basic first aid kit. What she saw inside made her freeze. There was something lodged deep in the ear canal, something small, something blocked by irritation and swelling, something that looked like it had been pushed far and likely years ago. She didn't touch it, she didn't try to remove it, but she knew this wasn't normal. And she knew she had to show Daniel. That evening, when Daniel returned home earlier than usual, Harriet approached him with a gravity he had rarely seen in anyone. Where's Michelle? He asked. In her room, Harriet replied. Sir, I need you to see something. They sat at the dining room table, and she explained what she found. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. That's impossible. Specialists have examined her ear dozens of times. I know, but it's there. He swallowed hard. What do you think it is? I don't want to guess, she said, but it shouldn't be there. Daniel stood up, already grabbing his car keys. We're going to the hospital right now. But Harriet gently touched his arm. Sir, before we go, there's something I think you need to hear, she explained, that the swelling around the object suggested it had been there far longer than anyone realized, and repeated poking or probing at it risked causing more damage. You need an ENT specialist, she said firmly. Not a general doctor. Daniel nodded slowly, overwhelmed. Tomorrow morning, first thing. But he didn't sleep that night. He sat beside Michelle's bed for hours, watching her breathe, wondering how long she had been living with this pain, wondering how many doctors had overlooked something so simple, wondering how much of her silence had been preventable. The next morning, they drove to a specialized ear clinic in another town, one recommended by a colleague in confidence. The doctor, an experienced ENT specialist named Dr. Warren, examined Michelle carefully. His face shifted from curiosity to concern. Finally, he stepped back. Mr. Hart, he said quietly, there is indeed something lodged in your daughter's ear, and judging by the tissue around it, it appears to have been there for several years. Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. Can you remove it? Yes, the doctor said, but I'll need to do it carefully. There's inflammation, but it's treatable. She should be able to hear again once it's out. Michelle looked up at her father. Daddy? What's happening? Daniel knelt and took her hand. We're going to help you hear again, sweetheart. Michelle smiled softly. Will things sound normal? I hope so, he said, his voice trembling. The procedure was scheduled for later that afternoon. It was delicate, but not life-threatening. They waited anxiously in the hallway while nurses prepared the room. And in that quiet corridor, Daniel found himself whispering things he hadn't said in years. Please, let her hear again. I'll do anything. Just let her hear again. 46 minutes later, the door opened. Dr. Warren stepped out holding a small sealed container. Inside was a tiny plastic bead yellow, worn, almost unrecognizable after years lodged in her ear. A bead? Daniel whispered. That's all it was? Yes, the doctor said. Likely from a toy or bracelet. It was pushed in deep enough that it became hidden by swelling. As she grew, the canal narrowed around it. That's why no one found it. Can she hear now? Daniel asked. "She's waking up," the doctor said. "You can see her." Daniel entered the recovery room with his heart hammering against his ribs. Michelle was lying peacefully, her eyes still adjusting to the light. She blinked slowly, then looked toward the door as he stepped inside. And something happened. For the first time in years, she reacted to the sound of footsteps. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft but surprised. "You sound close." Daniel covered his mouth with his hand, overcome. "You can hear me?" Michelle nodded slowly. "It's loud." "Loud good?" he asked. She smiled. "Loud good." He broke down, hugging her gently as she laughed softly. It was the first time he heard her laugh without strain or confusion. The first time he felt like she was truly reaching back toward him through all those silent years. Later that evening, after Michelle was discharged and resting at home, Daniel found Harriet on the back porch, quietly sipping tea. He sat beside her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You noticed something that the best specialists in the country missed." "I just paid attention," she said humbly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my daughter." Harriet shook her head. "She was always yours. She just needed someone to listen for her when she couldn't." That night, Michelle sat on the porch steps with her father, listening to the sound of crickets chirping, cars passing on distant streets, and the wind brushing through the trees. Sounds she had forgotten, sounds she thought she'd never hear again. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why didn't anyone find it before?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Sometimes, even smart people miss what's right in front of them." Michelle leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad Miss Harriet didn't miss it." "So am I," he whispered. As time passed, Michelle's hearing improved dramatically. Her confidence returned. Her schoolwork flourished. She joined a small choir group, not because she was particularly good at singing, but because hearing music again felt like rediscovering a memory she thought she'd lost forever. And every time she hit a milestone reciting a poem in class, answering someone on the first try, laughing at a joke she actually heard, Daniel felt a renewed sense of gratitude. Gratitude for a caretaker who had seen what others didn't. Gratitude for a second chance. Gratitude for a future where silence no longer stole years from his daughter's life. To everyone watching this, let me ask you, how would you feel if a child you loved lived in silence because of something so small, something so preventable, something so easily missed? And how would you feel if the person who finally noticed wasn't a doctor or a specialist, but someone quietly doing their job with care and attention? Stories like Michelle's remind us that the smallest details can change everything, that listening, truly listening, can save years of pain, and that sometimes the people who change our lives aren't the ones with fancy titles or advanced degrees, but the ones who simply care enough to look twice. Before we end this story, let me ask you again, if this were your child, your sibling, your niece or nephew, how would you handle the weight of those silent years? Would you blame yourself? Would you feel relief? Would you feel heartbreak for what was lost, or gratitude for what was restored? Whatever you feel right now, I hope this story reminds you to pay attention to the people you love, to the little things, the things that whisper rather than shout, the things that can go unnoticed if we move too fast. And before you go, remember to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. My boyfriend says I can't get 1,000 subscribers to this channel, so help me prove him wrong. Your support keeps this channel going. Thank you for watching.